I had to re-input my credentials to get onto the site because I reset my browser. So I apologize for the delay. We're about 6 minutes past. Just taking a look at who's on here now. I'm wondering if Frank is on. I guess Frank might not be on right now. Gabe, is Frank on? You can say this and you can say it in the chat if you know if Frank is on. I guess it doesn't really matter. Okay, thanks, Frank. Hello. Yeah, sorry for the delay again. My bad. I should have probably tried to take care of that a few minutes earlier so I didn't get caught in the snafu, but here we are now. This is good. Welcome to the introductory conference call. We're going to be talking about the fundamentals of status correction and exactly why this is important and how a little bit about how it's done. Not exactly the specifics on how it's done, but we're going to talk about we're just going to talk about the framework of exactly how it's accomplished and why it's a good idea. My name is Levi Charlton. I'm the host usually on these calls, and I've gone through a status correction process. Okay, Frank's mic's not working. I've gone through a status correction process, and we are, basically here to research together and to develop this idea and hopefully get a lot of other people unlocked from the system. A little bit about me, just real quick, is I did a lot of researching and searching around on the internet and stuff for, just different ways to, find out how best to spend my money and my resources. What am I contributing to? That was my philosophy. That was like sort of my driving force is what am I contributing to? Because everything that we do, every little nuanced thing that we do in our lives does contribute to something greater than ourselves. And so I, began with really wanting to eat the best food and not to take fluoride into my body and to not put chemicals on my skin that are going to eventually cause me to develop maybe cancer later on or other illnesses. I really started paying a lot of attention to how exactly I spent my money. And then I kind of came across a guy that brought up the idea of getting out of the United States citizenship as a status because, after all, your taxes and everything go as a contribution to this overall system. And for me personally, I had always had a feeling that the system was acting in immoral ways in a lot of cases. I won't say 100% of the time that it's immoral, but yes, the taxes are taken from you under threat, and they're used for things like foreign wars, regime change, just enriching the bankers, basically, bailouts, everything that has basically ruined society around the world, not just in the United States. So I thought this was a really good way of at least disempowering the system by just a little bit, just what my contribution, taking back my contribution. So, yes, property taxes. It just doesn't seem fully right. Now, I do understand the necessity for funding local police because who's going to really protect your property? If you're not there, if you're not looking, I guess the police aren't really going to protect it per se in real time a lot of the time. But they will, help to investigate and find anybody that might have caused damage to your property, hopefully. Anyway, my faith in the system overall had been completely washed away, and I was jaded. But then I found out about status correction. I went through a process of status correction that was offered by People's Awareness Coalition. And basically, ever since then, I've been involved with many of the great men and women that are also were also involved in People's Awareness Coalition. And to this day, we continue to research topics that have to do with life after status correction, proper status correction, and getting yourself ready for status correction. So we'll talk about now exactly what I mean by status correction. Let me get my handy-dandy presentation out. Now, there aren't many people on the interface here that are watching via the internet, but I'll go ahead and put it on there anyway because I see we may have a new attendee tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and put the presentation on. This is only going to take about a minute to load and process. So we're going to basically take a look. Yes, I see. Yes, thank you. We're going to take a look at some of the fundamentals on understanding basically legalese. We're going to, because this is something that newbies at reading law don't really understand, that sometimes terms and concepts are just used in a different way in law when you're reading a law. It's just different than the way that we use things in everyday speech. So here we go. The presentation's up, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. Hang on just a second. I'm reading something in here. Okay. All right. So as we get on here, basically, it says here, greetings from People's Awareness Coalition. That's the group that helped me to achieve my status correction. There's a really great book called The Red Amendment that helps to explain and compile a lot of information that would otherwise that you'd have to really spend a lot of time researching and sort of compiling it yourself. Most of it's publicly sourced, but it's all kind of put into this compendium called The Red Amendment. And we'll get into exactly what the name of the book means and all that stuff in a little bit. But People's Awareness Coalition stands for basically people, meaning everyone in America, awareness meaning political and constitutional understanding, and coalition meaning lawful nationals working together, staying in contact, being in good communication, and really just having each other's backs and sharing research and stuff. So that's what we're all about. So a little bit of the philosophy, core philosophy behind People's Awareness Coalition, and also just me as an individual and others that are part of this group. This is sort of a common thread that we have, right? So we all wish to educate ourselves and help educate each other. We want to get Americans up to speed on the current condition of the government in order to identify the problems and, more importantly, the remedy. So understanding is paramount in finding a solution. The next core philosophy would be nonviolence. It's our belief that wars and rebellions are the two most destructive diseases of society. That's a quote, actually, from Alexander Hamilton, I believe. And that is a sentiment that I share. And so any of the processes that we talk about do not involve any sort of confrontational behavior, antagonistic behavior, protesting, any of that sort of thing. It's all done administratively, and there's very few instances where you may have to go and meet face-to-face with some sort of government official or, somebody like a county sheriff or judges or attorneys and things like that. And you don't have to go on a wild goose chase, trying to hunt down exactly what's the next steps and stuff. The next is cooperation. The next philosophy is cooperation. We believe it's extremely important to stay connected with other PAC members and become involved. What I mean by that is People's Awareness Coalition members and others that are not necessarily part of People's Awareness Coalition, but obviously have the same sort of mentality. And then in a broader sense, we mean just staying connected with friends and family and spreading the message, kind of planting those seeds about about this overall concept here of status correction or changing your status. So, and then the last core philosophy would be the purpose. We have a clear purpose and a goal. All those in this group that I associate with, our purpose is to identify and correct the fundamental problem plaguing America for the last century and a half in order to restore the Republican governmental system as prescribed by the Constitution. This means a limited central federal government and more power back to the states. That's basically what we're all about. It's not a abolitionist movement. It's not an anarchist movement. And we actually don't much like to interact with anarchists and people that would, employ destructive means to achieve their goals. So I always like to ask a few rhetorical questions to keep in mind before we get into the presentation. Some of them include, why does it seem like they make up the rules as they go? That would be the hierarchy enslaving you, with air quotes, they. Why are so many people actually afraid of the government, and how many of you would like to feel more secure? So that's important. Why are so many people afraid of the government? That's because it seems like they make up the rules as they go, doesn't it? And lastly, I guess, how many of you would like to better understand why things are the way they are? That's important for answering all these questions. Like I said before, in order to really fix something, you have to understand it. So it's our goal to help to provide the tools that are needed to answer these questions on your own. We don't really want to just stand here and hand out information because we don't think that that makes anybody better. We want to push you to become enthusiastic about self-improvement and research and gathering knowledge. And then we can all get together and share the information, once we see a lot of initiative and everything. So where exactly do we begin? First, like I said in the beginning, we need to become familiar with certain terms and concepts, and then we'll explore how they fit together to see the picture more clearly. And this brings me back to the earlier point I made about certain terms and concepts being used in different ways than what we are accustomed to understanding them as when you're reading law. A lot of the terms and concepts that are used in the writing of the law can be confusing because it's not written the way that you're used to speaking in everyday speech. Modern parlance, I guess, is what you call it. So the first and most important term that we're going to go through, among others, is status. Then we're going to go on to citizen. We're going to look at power, exactly what is power, and on from there. Beyond that, we're going to look at the contrast between rights and privileges. We'll talk a little bit about what's liberty versus freedom, and we'll also look at legal versus lawful. These terms are really important to understand. So let's just jump right in on the first term, and that's status. And the reason that I put this at the very beginning is because this is the subject of the change that you want to make in your life initially when it comes to law. Now, leading up into status correction, the actual process of status correction, there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. And as you kind of get in deeper and you sort of get more involved with this group, you'll realize that there's prerequisites that you'll want to take care of before you just jump straight into something like changing your status and relinquishing your United States citizenship. You really have to look ahead into the future and see how life is going to change and how to set yourself up to adapt to that change in the best way. But back to exactly what status is. A status in the sense of what we will be focusing on is the condition or person of a thing in the eyes of the law, among its other many definitions.
Has joined.
Great. We have another person that joined. Okay, yeah, I just not used to this interface changing a lot. Anyway, we're getting on with the presentation, and welcome to the presentation. You haven't missed a whole lot. So we've just talked about the terms and concepts and how they're used in law and how they're a little bit different than in everyday speech, and we're on to the term status. And we're going to go over some examples of status. And again, status, the definition that we are concerned with is the condition of a person or thing in the eyes of the law. So some examples of status are child or parent, married or unmarried, servant or master, living or dead, and citizenship status. All of these are examples of types of statuses. And obviously, all of these different types of status can be changed. That is often a voluntary thing. Not in every case, but a lot of times it's a voluntary thing that you can change your status. And citizenship status is one of the voluntary changeables, I guess, or you can voluntarily change your status. So citizenship status is the subject of our conference tonight, and so now let's talk about exactly what is a citizen. So a citizen is somebody that owes allegiance to a government or is protected by it, presumably. Okay, so a citizen essentially is a part of a larger group and would be subservient to that larger group by voluntary declaration of allegiance. It doesn't mean that you are a slave, because that would imply that you can't readily just leave that condition if you if you start to come in conflict with the overall group. But in this case, a citizen is somebody that is voluntarily part of a larger group or organization. So I like to put this little quote in here. It's a very famous quote that everyone should recognize. It's from the Gettysburg Address made by Abraham Lincoln, and it goes, "Government of the people, by the people, and for the people." So this quote here leads me to believe, and among other things, that citizens are responsible for the actions of the government because they are what constitutes the government. By their contributions and acquiescence, they empower the systems that form. And by taking this principle into account, we have determined that invoking the inherent right to remove oneself from an objectionable system is the single most effective way of disempowering it. So after a while, after you've sort of gone along with the program and you realize, like, this is really something that I am not wanting to be part of, these actions that this government is taking, this is something that I am absolutely opposed to, whatever it may be. Some people might say that their line in the sand is abortions. Maybe the line in the sand for you is building weapons of mass destruction. Maybe the line in the sand for you is enriching international bankers that go and basically reap resources out of other countries and by using our tax dollars. Maybe that one of these or any other single instance is your line in the sand. In any case, most of the people that come onto this conference have reached that point, and they wish to disempower the system by removing themselves. So let's talk about exactly what is power now that we've mentioned it. Power, and the definition of power in the sense that we are using it, is the legal or official authority, capacity or right, possession of control, authority or influence over others. That's just a very simple, basic definition of power and the way that, in the context that we would like to use it, and that's taken from Merriam-Webster Dictionary. The most rudimentary form of power that we can think of is a parent in this context is a parent having power over the child, not their child having power over them, right? So this is a this is a relationship or a dynamic that is congruent with the order of nature. That is just basically the way things are supposed to be. It's sort of a common sense rule that's like a maxim. And this power dynamic, the parent having power over the child, is absolutely legitimate. It could be, you could call it lawful, and like I said, it's aligned with the order of nature. And it also reminds me of a maxim of common law that goes, the creation can never be more powerful than the creator. And that is a maxim of common law, like I said, and essentially a maxim is just universally understood truth that is sort of a common sense concept. Okay? So a little bit more about power, and more specifically legitimate power. Where does government's legitimate power come from? Well, the answer lies in the Declaration of Independence. It's stated directly that governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed. So we can surmise from this that legitimate power comes from consent. And if you don't consent, then the power is not legitimate. You have to, however, conduct yourself in a way that is acting in good faith. So you can't just wake up one day and say, I don't consent, and then decide not to pay your taxes, because you've not notified anybody of that choice, and they will be expecting your taxes. And when they don't come in, then what happens? We all know what happens after that, right? So we'll move on from here into the order of nature, and I mentioned this before, and this is basically the legitimate structure of power as it forms in nature and in societies that basically structure themselves under common law. So the law regards the order of nature, and that is also a maxim of common law, and that basically means that in the context of the example that I gave in the last slide about the parent having power over the child, the law regards the order of nature. So if the child decides to leave the home, and the parent says, you're not allowed to leave the home, you're not old enough, it's not safe for you, I need to keep you safe, you're under my I'm your custodian, I need to protect you. Okay, so the law would find in favor of the parent, because the parent needs to protect the child, and then therefore would have the right to contain the child within the house and not let the child leave, as long as obviously there's not some sort of hidden abuse going on there. So that is an example of how the law regards the order of nature, using our most rudimentary example from earlier. So what exactly is the order of nature? As I said before, the order of nature is, specifically is defined as the physical universe considered as an orderly system subject to natural laws. And like I said, that would include the dynamic that we spoke of a minute ago, the parent and the child. So simply put, it's the hierarchy of power. It's the correct way that power is supposed to flow. Now, let's take a look at the example, the big example, and this relates to governmental systems, and more specifically to the American example. And so before the Constitution was written in common law, ancient civilizations considered the following to be the true order of nature. And that would be that God is at the top of the highest rung of power. God is the almighty sovereign. And then God endows the creation with certain unalienable rights. And that would be individuals. Each individual, just by virtue of the fact of being born and being human, have inherent rights, that inherent human rights. So then these individuals, with their inherent human rights, then through free association, they form groups or states synonymously. They form these groups or states for their own mutual benefit or protection. And keep in mind, it's done voluntarily. So they could decide to leave at any time if they decided that this group was no longer congruent with their morals, or they felt threatened, or they just didn't feel safe, or it wasn't a benefit to them. They can leave. And so in the American example, these groups or states actually created a union, voluntarily getting together for their mutual benefit and protection. And so this was sort of like another layer of community, basically a very broad community of people that could say, we're all Americans, but I'm a Virginian, and you're a Marylander, and you're a Connecticuter, and so on and so on and so on. But this would leave the federal government last in line of the hierarchy of power that would exist in this system. If this system was lawful, it was in line with the order of nature. This is a system that's known as individualism, and that's where the rights and the happiness of the individual are considered more important than the collective. And that includes the right of the individual to leave that system if they no longer feel enriched by it. So as we move on, we're basically discovering exactly where our rights come from and how they're endowed to us, how we can use our little bit of power that we have as individuals to contribute to like a higher system, such as being a member of a state or being a member of a country or just a smaller group, maybe a community center or something like that. Any sort of thing, like even Boy Scouts or something. You can decide not to be part of that. But if you are part of it and there's, 100,000 Boy Scouts, then that's a really big political body there, right? So that would be a powerful body politic of all these people that decide to have the same status, right? So basically this is the concepts adding up to your rights. So let's take another look at another very famous quote, again, taken from the Declaration of Independence. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So, as we are continuing to examine terminology, let's take a look at the term unalienable. That basically means it's something that is impossible to take away or given up permanently. It's an attribute that is inherent in being human, essentially. So, if these rights are not able to be taken or given up permanently, what exactly changed if it seems like the government gets to do whatever they want to do? If it seems like they can just ignore or suspend these rights at any time, what exactly has happened? Okay, that's a very important question, and it's a very basic question. Your rights cannot be taken and they cannot be given up permanently, but you can decide not to value them and you can decide not to protect them. And in essence, what you've done is you've just given them up voluntarily, just by not paying attention to them. So, but they're always there waiting for you to wake up. And that last line, they're always there waiting for you to wake up, that reminds me of another maxim of common law, and it goes, the law may sleep but never dies. Okay, so basically through custom and usage, different things in societies, different societies may decide to do things in a different way, but that inherent human right is still there, and all it needs is for people to just start to assert it or start to really value it and stand up for it in mass. Okay, and then so here we have in the graphics, if you were able to see the graphics, you would see it's Homer Simpson with a little thought bubble there, and it says, "You mean men and women have unknowingly given up their rightful place in the order of nature? They must have been tricked." Because you wouldn't actually ever just give it up voluntarily, knowing what you were doing, right? It must have been some sort of deceit, some sort of deception, some sort of fraud that happened that hasn't really been caught on to en masse. Well, now's the time. This is where we start to talk about the 14th Amendment. This is the seed of deceit that has been planted in the United States Constitution. The 14th Amendment's complex language created, for the first time, a status called citizen of the United States. Prior to this, all individuals were members of their state. And so I emphasize the word created because earlier in the presentation I was talking about the maxim of common law that goes, the creation can never be more powerful than the creator. So by the virtue of the fact that the United States as a federal government, as a singular entity, the United States federal government created something, okay? And then that creation was then given to all individuals born within all the states. And that status, that creation, that gift, then was not rejected, was not given up, was not given back. And so essentially it's like a computer virus that you've downloaded and you don't realize it, I guess. And, essentially at that point, that was where the bottom of the hole, or the bottom of the boat, got a hole in it. That was when all the people in all the states began to drain out, because the people no longer shared an allegiance with their state. They all now became part of this big giant conglomeration, this collective called United States citizens. Okay? And so deeper in the amendment, as we read on, the phrase privileges and immunities appears. This is opposed to rights, and this allows the government to change or suspend or ignore these attributes at any time. So that therein is an example of how this system that has subverted the will of God, basically, has made it to where these inherent human rights that were given to us by the Creator are now no longer rights. They are privileges and immunities by consent, because this gift was given to you, this creation was given to you. You did not throw it away, and now instead of rights, you have privileges and immunities. So let's look exactly at what is a privilege. Okay? A privilege is a particular benefit, advantage, or immunity enjoyed by a person or class of people that is not shared with others. And it's a power of exemption against or beyond the law. Most importantly, it is not a right, but rather exempts one from the performance of a duty, obligation, or liability. So privileges and immunities are synonymous. The word immunity is used in the definition of privilege in this West Encyclopedia of American Law, Edition 2. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, we should just call privileges and immunities are the same thing. A privilege is not a right. It says later on in the passage, a privilege is not a right. Okay, so rights basically are unalienable. They cannot be taken away. They cannot be given up permanently. However, a privilege or an immunity can be changed, suspended, or ignored at any time, because after all, this is part of the governmental gift. They gave it to you, the government did. The government can take it away. That in that system. Okay? Now this is the best example. Now that we've gotten this far, this is the best example of within the order of nature, okay, the difference between something that's legal and something that's lawful, or something that is de jure versus something that is de facto. So de jure is synonymous with lawful, and de facto is synonymous with legal. Okay, and we'll go into that next. But this amendment ignores the order of nature, known as government de jure, and it replaces it with man's law, known as government de facto. Now a little bit more about legal and lawful. So, what is the difference between legal and lawful? This is something that a lot of people don't really know, because these two terms just are often used interchangeably when you're talking in everyday speech. Well, something that's lawful is something that's in accordance with the law of the land, such as birthright, being part of the land, being or having a right to the use of the land in which you're born, having a right to membership in a community in which you are born to. Okay, so let's say in a collectivist nightmare, let's say in a dystopian future, something more in line with what happens in North Korea, where children are not part of their families. When a child is born, it's taken almost immediately and put into state care, and then it's raised by the state so that there is no maternal bond and that there is no bond of family and allegiance to family and recognition of lawful status. Okay? So lawful means something that's according to the law, permitted, sanctioned, or justified by law. Lawful properly implies a thing conformable to or enjoyed by law. Okay, and again, the term de jure synonymous with lawful. It also means by right or of right, conforms to natural law. Legal, on the other hand, pertains to just the understanding, the exposition, the administration, the science, and the practice of law. What I mean by that is the ritual, just following the letters that are on the page. Forget about the feelings and the human compassion and the sympathy and everything like that. Doesn't have anything to do with that. We follow what's on this page regardless of what we know to be right in our hearts. So something that is legal is synonymous with de facto, which means of fact, regardless of right. And this is man's law. Okay, so legal looks more to the letter of the law, lawful to the spirit of the law. Legal looks more to appropriate conformity to positive rules of law, and lawful for accord with ethical principle. Legal imports rather that the forms of law are observed and the proceedings are correct in method, and that rules prescribed have been obeyed. Just like I said, a sort of robotic understanding of the letters on the page, like a machine following a program. Whereas lawful that looks that the right is actual in substance and moral quality secured. So this is the juxtaposition of these two terms, lawful and legal. And it's really important to understand. So let's look at the new legal system that's been created through Reconstruction. Literally, the government was reconstructed. It was flipped around and torn down and rebuilt, all with just the writing of a few laws. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They all work in concert together to create the new order. The new order. So in this new order, what is the highest rung of power on the new order is the federal government, because after all, they're the creator, right? They created the status. They created the citizenship status to themselves, right? So they're the creator now. The federal government is the creator. The groups and states are then subservient to the federal government, and last in line is the individual, and completely omitted from this system is God. God is not recognized in this collectivist system. This system is known as collectivism, and that's where the group is always considered more important than the happiness and well-being of the individual. Hence, income tax. Hence, just everything that sort of flowed from this point on, from 1868 onward. Okay, Social Security and all these other things, entitlements, so to speak. So this is the new order. So basically, let's rewind just a little bit. The new order, the collectivist order, let's talk about an example of collectivism. There's tons of examples of collectivism throughout history. Stalin, Mussolini, Mao. Now we have North Korea. North Korea is a collectivist nightmare. You're not allowed to just leave if you don't like it. They will kill you. I doubt that anybody that lived in Stalin's Russia was allowed to just say, hey, you know what? This doesn't seem right. I want to get out of here. I don't think that probably would have been taken kindly. Okay? So we don't yet live in an absolute collectivist nightmare just yet, but in order to not get to that point, I think we need to pull things back in a little bit. We need to rein it in a little bit before this United States federal government gets to that point. So what we've kind of learned from this presentation so far is that political power comes from groups of people that share the same status, okay? That's why the states seem to have no power. And that answers the question from earlier where I asked, why does it seem like they just do whatever they want? And I'm saying they with air quotes. It's because you are not understanding the rules of the game, okay? If that's what it seems like to you, you're not understanding the rules of the game. It's not that they're breaking the law. It's just that you don't actually know what is the law. This new legal system allows for them to do that because in actuality, you are just property to their overall system. You basically use the functions of the system, you use the benefits, and therefore you have to bear the burden. And that's also a maxim of common law. Common law comes up all the time when you talk about the American system of law because, after all, that is the framework in which everything is built, and it does still follow common law. It's just a twisted and manipulated version of common law right now, where basically everybody has given themselves voluntarily into a system that abuses them, and they don't realize that they have the right to basically take themselves out of that system. All the people in the states are United States citizens. This is why it seems like the states have no power. They have these individuals have no rights. They have no protection of the Constitution of the state wherein they reside. And this basically is a concept that will blow your mind up if you've never heard anything like this before, but it is the solid truth, the rock solid truth. Now, there is a remedy. There is a way out, and it's not outside of your reach. We're not going to talk about exactly how to do that tonight, but I'm just letting you know that there is a way out and that basically we can help you, but we have to get to know you first, and we have to make sure that we're not throwing you out into the middle of a pond, figuratively, without a paddle. We have to know that we are setting you up to succeed and not to fail. So that's why we don't just give out this information just readily, because it's not just safe to disseminate to just the public at large. The ability to take yourself out of the system, you have to know what's going to happen afterwards. So how do we fix it? How exactly is it fixed? The best way to correct the current situation is to bring the power back to the states, as intended by the founders, by correcting your status to that of a state national or a national of a state. This is recognized in the United States Code. Okay, so this is not just a loophole. This is not just some sort of a weird gray area. This is actually recognized in the United States Code, and all the nationalities of all the states are mentioned in the Styles Manual. You can look that up. It's a 1984 Styles Manual. You can look that up, and it notes every state and the nationality and what it's called. It means basically correcting your status means pledging allegiance to a state, thereby bringing political power back to the states and bringing the federal government back into its intended function. Again, we're not trying to just totally dissolve the federal government, even though at this point I believe overall it is evil. I don't wish to just burn it all down to the ground. I don't think that that would make us better off at all. I think that anarchy would ensue and that things could probably end up worse than they are right now. People's Awareness Coalition has been around for quite a while, since 1998, trying to basically push this remedy out to people and to help people understand the mission, to help people understand constitutional education and political awareness. It's been slow going for many different reasons, but basically, essentially, it's just it boils down to, this idea has been working its way into the consciousness. It's come around now. It's an idea in whose time has come. Back in 1998, I don't think people were quite fully ready for it, and it just needed to permeate, and the seeds needed to be planted. In time, it was realized that most Americans weren't quite ready for one reason or another. A lot of the time, the people that are interested in this are, let's say, mature enough to the point where, like once you get to a certain age, and I don't want to use that because it's an arbitrary sort of concept. Sometimes people very young can sort of start to become interested in these sorts of topics, and also on the other hand, people that are very old still aren't interested in this sort of topic. In any case, essentially, it's been realized that many Americans aren't quite ready. Maybe they're not ready to hear the information because they reject it. They don't want to hear it. Maybe they're not ready to go through a process like this because of their dependencies. Maybe they actually are on some sort of government assistance that they can't leave behind. That's understandable, and that still is respectable because we all have to do what's best for ourselves, and we don't expect anybody to just jump off a cliff because that's the right thing to do, so to speak. So essentially, that's why the alliance was formed. So the PAC alliance was formed basically as those that are in the periphery of the central group, and the central group being made up of those that have gone through the process, and everyone else that is around in the periphery are those that either want to go through the process eventually, or they realize that they can't go through the process, but they still understand the information and they want to help. They want to help with different projects, or they want to help spread the word, and they want to, spread knowledge in their community among their friends and family, and so on. We're always looking for good people to move this vision forward, and we're always looking for people that want to help free America from this deception and fraud and assist those that truly want freedom. If you're not able to find it yourself, then you could definitely enrich somebody else's life by helping them to achieve it if you realize that they can do it, but you can't. So we're here to help, and PAC is here to help, and PAC has released a lot of information that can be found at pacandlaw.us in the form of white papers, and you can start your educational journey there with the assistance and consultation of PAC members at our Facebook group, Official PAC Alliance. You can find me on Facebook. I'm Levi Fishbone Tarleton. And again, if you're not in a position to change your own status, you can assist those that are. You can assist by volunteering time to assist with projects, or you can actually donate to help somebody to, get through the process, or to help, get more books to give out to people, or to buy books for your friends and family, so that they can understand the concepts. And the book that I'm referring to, again, is the Red Amendment. So I did mention that we were going to talk about the name, the Red Amendment, earlier, and basically it's very simple. The red is symbolic of communism, and the Red Amendment refers to the 14th Amendment, and that basically is the seed of communism, the seed of deception that was planted and has grown and flourished by basically the ignorance of the people. And so if you're ready to really learn, you can access the best information, the best compendium of information on this subject by getting yourself a copy of the Red Amendment. I actually have copies at a heavily discounted rate, and a few other people that are on the call tonight have copies also that are discounted. And if you want to get yourself a copy, then stay on the call and we'll talk about it. Because now the presentation is over,